They shoot the shit. They shoot the shit. Shoot, shit, shit. Shooting the shit with Chippa.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Shooting the Shit with Chippa, one of several shows where I talk to people on the internet. The only difference between this and the Chipman Brothers Tangent is that I supplement my brother Bob, Movie Bob Chipman, for other people. And I have a very special guest tonight. And before I tell you who that is, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping here. As always, I'd like to thank my $15 or more a month patrons, Mason, Christopher Finnick, Patricia Chipman, Hugh K. Campbell Jr., Alex Peregrine, and Kevin CV. And I'd like to thank a brand new patron as of earlier today, H. Freezy. So thank you guys very much. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by somebody, and today it is brought to you by the Geeks with Shields podcast. The Geeks with Shields, each week hosts Axel and Ulrich provide a nerdy escape from the darkest timeline, talking everything from comics to long-forgotten movies and TV shows. If the darkest timeline has you down, check out the Geeks with Shields podcast for all your nerdy needs. And with that, I'll let my guest introduce himself. Good sir, tell the internet who you are.
Hi, my name is Eric Vespe, and I am a, movie nerd, professional movie nerd. Is that the right way to phrase that?
Yes, I think so. We all aspire ourselves professional movie nerds, but you are one.
Yeah. I've been writing about movies on the internet since before people knew that you could do that. I'm a very old man when it comes to the internet age. I've been doing this since '97. So.
Wow, the year of Titanic, as it were.
Yeah. Yep. No, there's it was a crazy year. That time people kind of forget, especially like kids, you know, even not like even super old kids or young kids now, like just don't remember that time when the internet was something brand new. You know, there was an excitement to that era that not a lot of people just even remember anymore, because the internet's so commonplace. You're walking around with a supercomputer in your pocket every day, you know, but I vividly remember my parents getting their first like desktop, and you know, before that my grandparents were always the ones that oddly were on the cutting edge of technology. So like I remember signing into their AOL in the like early 90s or early to mid 90s, and you know how amazing it was to, you know, use this giant hulking machine to talk to other people around the world.
Yeah, right. I remember my parents upgraded from an Amiga 500 to an AT&T Globalist with 1 gigabyte of storage space. Oh my God. And a 14.4 dial-up modem. And it was the coolest thing in the world. And me and my brother shared an AOL account. We were Ultraman 20 was our screen name. And that was probably like 94, I'd say.
Yeah, that would be a good question to ask people. Like, you know, what was your first internet identity? My first AOL email address was Dark Tower, because I was a huge Stephen King nerd. So still am a huge Stephen King nerd. But yeah, no, but Dark Tower at AOL was taken. So I was like, I took the A out, so it was DRK Tower, and I think people thought I was Dr. Katower.
I'm surprised it wasn't like X_X Dark Tower X_X. You know, all those things.
That was way too advanced for me at that age. I was just like, I'll just drop letters. I didn't even think about adding numbers or letters or anything.
So how old are you, by the way?
I'm 38. So I'm not
cool. So you're right there with me. I'm 35. Nice.
Yeah. No kids yet though. So I just have my nephews who have they are 12 and 10 now, and I've been they certainly got me they've awakened a parental instinct in me that I never knew that I had. I knew I always liked kids, but like, especially being a movie nerd, there's nothing better than sharing the stuff that you love with kids, and having that, you know, get to re-experience it through their eyes. It like totally like made me like, okay, yeah, no, I think the family man life might be in my future. For sure.
Oh, it's awesome. It makes all that stuff. It gives you a reason to revisit it. Toys, movies, you know, all of it, and you know it. you start looking at things with a different eye. Like the first time I watched Finding Nemo as a parent, it was a completely different goddamn movie, right? It's like all of a sudden I'm like having a panic attack. Like, no, he's missing. Like, we got to find him right now, man. Whereas, when you're, a teenager and you see that, or a young kid, you're associating with Nemo. You don't even recognize the parents have a story.
Yeah.
No,
the one that happened to me, and this is, I wrote for a long time for a site called Ain't It Cool News, and it was pretty great there, when I was active there, because I had such autonomy. If I had an idea for something, I just did it. There was no chain of command or whatever, and that overlapped a little bit with me becoming the cool movie uncle with my nephews, and there was one that really struck me, one viewing of something, and that was Steven Spielberg's AI.
Oh.
And that was a movie that I remember being a defender of it when it came out, but I kind of saw the point that people had that, maybe it should have ended on the ocean floor. That's the Kubrickian cold ending and all that. But what I didn't anticipate, I did a rewatch of it. And the reason why I brought it up Ain't It Cool is because it hit me so much as I ended up writing a big, like, kind of breakdown of how having kids that you love in your life completely changes your perspective on that particular story. And because I just kind of threw it on in the background while I was packing for a trip. I was going overseas, and it was on HBO Now or HBO Go, I think, at the time. And whichever one was the on-demand HBO service. And I'm like, oh, I haven't watched AI in a while. I'll throw that on. And I ended up like not packing, and like I stopped folding my clothes and like all that stuff. And I just watched it, and I was sobbing throughout the movie, and I had no idea why it was hitting me, so hard until I started to examine it. And that's what I wanted to write about the experience, because that was essentially a way for me to figure out, why this movie that I'd already liked was hitting me on such a deeper emotional level. And it was because I could, it was because I could, place, my nephews, Max and Rocco, I could place them in David's shoes in a way that, was more intellectual the first time. I could intellectually understand, a child being, unloved and forced away from his parents, or his, parental figures, I could understand that emotionally, but on a theoretical level, versus, having your own personal life experience, which is, kind of at the core of everything, why I love movies. And I don't know, it was interesting. That was kind of like a therapy session writing that, because it was, most of my writing is all about it's not crazy deep stuff. It's more like, this is my emotional, your instant in the moment reaction to things. And I don't know, it was interesting kind of peeling back the layers and looking at this art form that I love, in a way, and examining it, and how impactful it can be. Yeah.
It's awesome that you just jumped right into the AI thing, because that was one of the things I had in my mind that I was going to talk to you about. It's you're finishing my sentences before I ask them. That that particular one, I remember saving that like offline and like showing that to people to like help defend that movie, because I've been a defender of that since day one. Again, just like you said, fully admitting to the movie's flaws. But I love that so much about the movie, that the movie is so like rough and rocky, and it helps the themes, I think, come through a little bit better, that not everything sticks and not everything it tries fully works. And I like that better than a well-polished, boring movie.
Spielberg in particular, he swings for the fences, and that's why he has so many home runs. But even I'll take a fascinating misfire, and I don't think AI is a misfire. Like, I think that it's a misunderstood movie. But when I talk about a Spielberg misfire, that's a little bit more like 1941, which is a movie that I still love, but it's fascinating to me in the train wreck aspect of him not really achieving what he's setting out for, but he's swinging so hard for the fences on it, and he's invested so 100% in it that I can't help but like the movie. But AI, I think, gets a little bit short shrift in and there's in a lot of people's readings of it, in that story that that I was talking about and that you mentioned, one of the big things that I focused on in that piece was about the ending and how people interpret it as a happy ending, and it's the farthest thing from a happy ending. Like, just because you see this little boy robot get what he wants, he gets his time with his mother who loves him. It's not lasting. It's him dying. The happy ending that everybody's saying, is so happy at the end of this movie is the death of this little boy that that they've been following for the whole thing. Yeah, and you have those crazy alien-looking futuristic robots that rescue him from the sea floor, and they essentially tell him that they can give him what he wants, but one, it's going to kill him, and two, it's going to erase every bit of soul that his mother has in this universe. If they are going to pull that to give him this limited time that he has with her. But once they do that, every bit of her is gone. So he's not only killing himself in this moment, he's also to have this little bit of happiness and closure in his life. He's also completely eradicating anything that might remain of the person he loves, in this world. To do it, it is such a brutal ending that, because it's shot, so happy and with Janusz Kaminski's soft focus and it's this warm thing after this perilous cold movie. Like I think people really misinterpret it as being a happy ending, but it's not only for them, but then you have Teddy kind of resigning himself to sit at the end of the bed and shut down himself too. It's a really dark, depressing movie. I don't know. At some point, somebody's gonna really reevaluate that, on a level that, is better than anything I could do, and hopefully people will pay attention to it.
No, absolutely. And it's another thing, to gauge people's understanding of it is when you hit the very alien-looking robots. People don't get that that's supposed to be robots. That's a whole other movie in and of itself, of artificial intelligence has now taken over the planet, and they're kind of going around archaeologically digging for any remnants of humanity they can find. And by finding this kid, they find a link to their creators. It's such a cool thing. And I ask people, they go, oh, they just look like the stupid aliens from Close Encounters. And I go, did you pay any attention?
Yeah, gotta listen. It's and that's brutal too, because you have they're searching for their God. They're searching for God, and they find, essentially David is the Ark of the Covenant, to them. This is their connection to God. And, it's also amazing and emotional to me that they recognize his needs and wants and choose to give him what he needs over, whatever scientific and the theological, thing that he represents for them. It's like they essentially let him die versus, making him, answer all their questions and cutting him open and, all that stuff, instead of making him a science project. It's interesting. There's lots of little connections to other Spielberg stuff, because you can see a little bit of Peter Coyote from E.T., in that too, where, this big scary thing, this guy that has been chasing the alien that you think is the bad guy is actually he's what Elliot would be grown up. All he wants is to see, proof of an extraterrestrial life, and, he wants to be kind to it, and he's willing to let it go. I mean, that's, I don't know. There's a lot of Spielberg in there. There's a lot of Kubrick in there. AIs, to me, is one of the most fascinating movies in Spielberg's whole filmography.
And it makes it
that evolves, yeah.
And it makes it so much better, when you know how good of friends they were, and you see that movie, then you go watch Ready Player One, and you get that wonderful Shining sequence where it's just I sat there watching it and going, he's getting to play with his friend again. This makes me so happy.
No, for sure. No, there's definitely an undercurrent to that in that moment, in that sequence. And funnily enough, you mentioned that another big thing I did with my nephews was when I saw Ready Player One, I knew they were going to lose their minds for it. They are, they're the perfect age, to watch this. They over the years, I've shown them so many of the movies referenced in there. Like I took them to see Back to the Future trilogy, big screen. We've seen Ghostbusters. We've seen like all this stuff that I knew that they were gonna pick up on. But like I was sitting there going, like, but I know they haven't seen The Shining. The youngest one's doesn't handle horror very well. He says he does, but then I always get the call after we watch something scary from his dad going, yeah, so he had nightmares, and can you stop showing those movies? Like I showed him The Sixth Sense, and apparently, and they really both loved it, but apparently Max, the younger one, like had a dream about the boy with the bloody head, and that was the kid ghost that he's like, hey, you want to see where my dad keeps his gun? And he turns around. That is.
My hair's standing on its end with you just talking about that. That one messes me up every time I watch that damn movie.
It's crazy. So I knew that I knew that if I asked for permission, I might get a no, but I also knew that I really wanted to take them to see Ready Player One, and they have to see The Shining in order to fully get it. So I essentially went rogue, and luckily for me, the parents were fine. But I when I had them for our movie day, I said, we're going to go see this new movie by the guy that did Jurassic Park and Jaws and all the stuff that we've watched. And it's really cool. You're going to like it. It's, kind of about video games, but not. And I said, but there is, before we do that, I want to show you this scary movie. And they said, why? I'm like, I'll tell you, later. I'll tell you after we have our movie day. And I wasn't quite sure how they were going to take it, because it is a little slow. It's not the kind of movie that we watch a lot. There's, of course, there's nudity in it, and there's the N-word is spoken, quite liberally in the bathroom scene, and and I knew that there was going to be some times where we had to talk about it, but like, their reaction instantly was like, oh, that guy's a bad guy because he said the N-word, that means he's racist. And I'm like, yeah, that's like good. I don't have to explain that part, and and they're also not at that age. They weren't in that time of where they were like super into oogling, girls and stuff. So they self-censored themselves whenever there's nudity. There was the hands over the eyes. They were embarrassed, that kind of thing. So
that's adorable.
So that was fine, and they handled it well, and they really like surprisingly were super into the movie, and I'm like, okay, that's good, you really liked it. And then when we saw, it was like maybe an hour in between finishing that, and like, okay, we got to go to the movie theater and watch Ready Player One, and we were in the theater, and they get to the sequence when they're trying to find the key, and they're seeing like all the posters go around, the stuff, and like then they tap me on I remember Rocco tapping me on the shoulder, going, hey, look, and whispering like The Shining is over there. I said, yeah. And then he, in the movie, he picks it, and suddenly the music starts, and like Rocco like turned to me, and he had the biggest like smile and recognition. His eyes were wide. He's like, like I know this. And like, and as they were going in, the one character goes into room 237, and he was like, no, don't go in there. Like, he had that thing, and so he was in on the joke. I'm sorry that I'm talking only about my relationship with my nephews on this, but
no, dude, I love it. You're tapping in. I run a show called Creating Geeks with my wife. It's one of the other shows I do, and that's what the whole show is about. It's about grabbing stuff from our childhood and talking about if it's okay to do with our kids. And you're hitting on all the reasons why Ready Player One I loved so much is because you're seeing it with the perfect audience. That's the audience the movie's made for. It's made for us that have seen all that stuff, but we basically wrote that movie, right? For a kid to see it, it's like, oh man, my uncle or my dad has shown me all this stuff, and now I get to see a greatest hits reel of it all play. I can't wait. It's references that a young kid can immediately get, and I loved that about it.
Well, and there's something special also about feeling like you're in on the joke, or you're a collaborator with the movie, and that's what I saw in Rocco's eyes whenever he, like, when the music, the Shining score, the iconic theme, kicked up, and then suddenly they were in front of the Overlook, and he was more into that sequence than in like almost anything I can remember showing him. It's like, because he felt like this was made for him, and I don't know, that was a very, very special thing. But I do get a lot of, like, some of the biggest pleasure in my adult life has come from showing these kids movies, and And here, I don't know if I've been more proud of anything than when we watched Tron and Tron Legacy, and they were super into it. And then the next time I saw them, they said we want to watch Tron again. And I'm like, oh, the newer one? Like, no, the original one. And I'm like, oh, yeah, all right, you guys,
you're doing something right.
Yeah, you're on the right track.
Oh, that's awesome. So we segued into Ready Player One and AI and talking about Spielberg, and this is like a match made in heaven, man. I feel like I'm talking to someone I've known forever, which is awesome because this is the point where I get to gush and be a little starstruck and say that you're my favorite internet film critic, and I mean that. And it's weird to say that with someone that I've had just such like a friendly conversation with, but this really is an honor to have you on here. And it's the name Quint, I think, that caught me in the pictures when you were originally on Ain't It Cool, the little drawing of your character, being Quint from the movie. But we share a mutual mutual favorite film,
Yeah.
And
of course, Orca.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And my history with you, I've said this in the emails before when we were talking, but I won a contest. It's like the only contest I've ever won from writing in for anything. It's one of those email contests. I won tickets to see The King of Kong at the Brattle Theater in Boston from you. So that's why I was like, oh man, I still have that guy's email address, even though you had it posted on your Twitter and everything. But that was a fantastic movie. What was your first kind of initiation into that film? Were you like aware of its production and everything, or is it something that kind of just fell on from the job?
For King of Kong?
Yeah.
Let's see. I think I saw that at Sundance. It either played Sundance or South by when I saw it the first time. Yeah, I'm trying to remember because there was a competing documentary that was almost about the same thing.
Yep.
And I saw one of those at Sundance. I think I saw the other one because I think King of Kong maybe played Slam Dance, and the other one that nobody remembers was the big Sundance movie. But either way, I know I saw it at a film festival and I loved it, and I saw it early enough that they put my quote on the poster, which
I remember that
a few times over the years, but yeah, no, I remember being very pleased with that one in particular because it's just an amazing underdog story, and I mean that movie. There's it has one of the best villains in like the history of all film, and it's a documentary. Like there's nobody that I like to hate more than Billy Mitchell.
Oh yeah.
And he's such a pompous, entertaining, but obviously talented guy. He's talented in this one little aspect. And he reminded me so much of like, the people in my life that had been kind of skeezy and, snake oil salesman kind of people. But I remember just kind of like seeing this David versus Goliath, story that's there, all around these arcade games that I grew up playing. It's kind of, it's such a great, doc, and it's such a easy to watch thing. But yeah, no, I remember seeing it. I remember loving it. And then they reached out after I saw it at one of those festivals and reviewed it. And, when it came time to push it and screen it around the country, they asked if I would, help run, some ticket giveaways and get Ain't It Cool readers in. And, I'm more than happy to help spread the love of, something that I really enjoyed.
Yeah. It was crazy seeing it in the theater because outside of your review and the, trailer that you guys ran for it, I'd never really heard of it, but then I started reading into it and I'm like, oh, I got to see this movie. So sitting there seeing it, and then it's kind of like you talk about with Ready Player One, where you're watching it and you're like, wait a minute, like I know more about what's going on here, and there's more to this. Like I feel like I'm contributing because Fun Spot, where they have their great big Donkey Kong showdown in the movie, and where a lot of the documentary takes place, is my childhood arcade. Like we spent every summer up in the White Mountains in New Hampshire, and this was just when in the 80s and 90s when I was a kid, this was just any other regular old arcade. The family just had so much real estate that they kept all the games and they kept them going, and now they're the American Video Game Arcade Museum. And
Oh,
the
that's-
place, I don't know if you've ever actually been there before, but that place is worth a trip.
No, that sounds awesome.
And and Halloween in Salem just went by. I know that you were up this way a couple times recently. You went and visited Stephen King's house. Remember, guy gave you was trying to get you into that Kirk Hammett exhibit.
That's right.
That was a really cool thing.
Yeah, no, I only was in Salem for a short period of time. I was there on a set visit. It was actually one of the last few things I did for Ain't It Cool, because I think that was the the September or whatever. That was a few weeks before Fantastic Fest, and that's when all the shit went down with Harry Knowles, my boss, getting Me Too'd, and he looking into all that stuff and deciding I couldn't stay with the site anymore. But funnily enough, the set that I went to visit is a movie that still hasn't come out and might never come out, because it was The New Mutants. And
no shit.
Yeah, so they were shooting in Boston, and I'd been around the area, but I never spent much time there. But I knew that if I was going out to visit that set, I had to make the pilgrimage up to Bangor and see Stephen King's house and do all that stuff. And of course, Salem's on the way. So I was only in Salem for just a little bit. I had breakfast at a place that was recommended to me by, of all people, Damien Eccles of the West Memphis 3 fame.
Oh, no. Wow. What was the place you went?
Oh, geez, it was like the Red Barn or something.
Red Sandwich Shop.
Red Sandwich Shop. There you go. And he said that it had some of the best breakfast, and he wasn't kidding. And what was amazing is I went to eat there, and there were like 3 people, or a table of like these 2 guys dressed as witches, eating too, in like full like Wicked Witch of the West, green face paint and stuff like that. It was crazy. But yeah, no, I only had
that would be Salem for you.
Yep. I did the museum, or the Witch Museum tour, and saw the little not quite animatronic mannequin displays, and I had to do that, and then I drove the 4 hours up to Maine and paid however much on all the ridiculous turnpikes you guys have up there, and to get up there. And
oh yeah,
and no, that was a fun trip. But yeah, I only got to see the Hammett exhibit like from the outside. Like I kind of poked my head in, and they were just like, yeah, it's gonna be like $25, and I'm like, nah, I can't. I can't do it. I only have like half an hour before I have to hit the road. I don't want to spend that money and not actually get to spend time in here.
It was pretty damn cool.
I bet.
But
yeah.
have you played Fallout 4?
Oh yeah.
So you can walk to the Witch Museum.
Oh, I know. There's a really mean Deathclaw in there.
Yes, there is. And Lynn Woods, where I see people playing the game all the time, in Lynn Woods, I can basically see from my house, which is pretty cool. And it's pretty damn correct that stone tower up there has been many a set for independent films my brother and I have made over the years.
Nice. Yeah, there's something to that stuff. I was a big Fallout 3 fan. That was like the game that got me into RPGs, and I remember I did some sort of press visit to DC. This is when Obama was still in the White House, so it was for Lone Survivor. It was the Peter Berg movie.
Yeah.
And so they had a thing where we met the actual guy that Mark Wahlberg played and had dinner with him and Peter Berg, and they put us up at the hotel that Obama stayed in when he was like there's that transition period or whatever where he still has to be in Washington but he can't move into the White House. And so we were like literally across the street from the White House, and I remember like there were 2 or 3 times where I had some free time, 2 or 3 days while I was there, and just walking down to the mall and walking around to the memorials and stuff, and I knew it already by heart because I played so much Fallout 3. So I'm like, I knew where I was depending on which museum I was nearby, I can go like, oh look, I know if I'm over here, then the Jefferson Memorial has got to be this way, which is a really screwed up way to learn your historical geography. But
I'm visualizing this like the movie Deja Vu.
Yeah.
where you've got like one eye is seeing the game and the
Yeah.
other eye is seeing reality.
I,
Oh,
I may or may
Jesus.
not have been walking around with the Fallout 3 score and all the old music on my iPod as I was going around.
Oh,
I might not.
Jesus.
Yeah. Some Cole Porter and all that stuff playing, and like I had my own Pip-Boy. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, more ways where art imitates life. So Lynn, where I live, which is right next to Salem, and in that same woods, has a pirate treasure hidden in it, supposedly. And um, when you're a little kid and you hear that story, there's a place called Dungeon Rock, and they do a pirate day every year, and a guy in a pirate costume takes you on tour of it. And the way it went down is a guy owned the land, and he believed that a local legend pirate, had buried his treasure there. And so he was digging a tunnel trying to find it. So you can go and walk around in this tunnel. And his son, when the guy died, donated the land to the city. And that's why we have this giant woods that no one can touch. But
Oh, nice.
I heard this story for the first time, and think about like a 4-year-old, 5-year-old kid who's obsessed with the movie Goonies, and hearing that there's a pirate treasure in our. So that was like, the Boy Scouts, like every couple of years would like dredge it and like go in there and like try to find it. And it's like, I love how, this like, generation that we're, the older folk in right now, grew up with all that stuff, where it's just like, your life can be so swayed by these geeky things. It's awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's also you have not only your love of film. Yeah, I grew up a movie nerd too, but there's also that childhood sense of adventure that like every generation can relate to, whether it's my grandparents and playing cowboys and Indians,
Right.
and and being obsessed with that kind of thing. I grew up in the Bay Area of California. I moved to Austin when I was 13, but when I was in the Bay Area, there was a place called the Winchester Mystery House, and I'm not sure if you know this, and that was a place I was obsessed with because I love ghost stories and I love Stephen King and I love scary movies, and you have this local place. It's a real place. It's really messed up, and if people don't know the history of it, there was a really crappy Helen Mirren movie that was kind of made about it recently.
Yes, there was.
Called Winchester, but it's what happened was there was like this mansion that was owned by the husband and wife that like owned Winchester guns, the ones that tamed the West, the Winchester rifles. And when the husband passed, the wife kind of went crazy and believed all the ghosts of people killed by her husband's guns were tormenting her, and the only way that she could stop them was to keep adding on different additions to her house, and she wanted to confuse the ghosts, so she built like stairways to blank walls, and she built corridors that went nowhere and trap doors, and it's like this. So it's now a tourist attraction where you can go around and I remember she was an adult to me when I was a kid taking this tour, but she must have been all of 17, 18, 19 years old. But I remember she said something about how there was always new things being discovered in the house that they didn't know, and new trapdoors and new things that people never saw, and hidden stairways and stuff like that. And so like I remember being like 8 or 9 years old taking this tour and touching everything because I wanted to be the one that discovered the next thing. Any bump, any board that was a little bit raised from the other ones, I tested and pressed and pulled on and tried to figure out, was a new secret passage that nobody ever discovered before.
That would be awesome. Oh man, I've always wanted to visit there. It's funny that you bring that up because the people I used for my ad read, the Geeks with Shields guys, who I'm really good buddies with, did an episode for their Bootober this year on the Winchester Mystery House.
Yeah.
So I'll just plug them for a second there because no, so that's awesome. So you moved from the Bay Area to Austin, and so you've been in Austin pretty much since?
Yeah, oh yeah. No, I've lived in Austin since I was 12 years old. I was 93 when I moved. I turned 13 here. Yeah. So I've been in Austin long enough to actually earn the ability to go around saying, "Well, this is nothing like it used to be. It changed so much." It's so funny. I have so many friends that moved here in like 2012 and 2013 going, "Man, I don't recognize the city anymore." I'm just like, like, please. Like, tell me about it.
Try 93.
Yeah. I came out the summer of Jurassic Park, yo.
Oh man, Jurassic Park, the movie that my uncle scared me too much about how real and horrifying it was. So the day my mother picked me up from school to take me to see it, I freaked out and said I didn't want to see it. And then because it was a Spielberg movie, I had to wait like 5 years for it to come out on VHS.
All right. Yeah. Oh, that's yeah. No. I have very vivid memories of watching that big. I mean, I was about the best target age for that movie as you could possibly be. I was a 12-year-old boy, and it was a Spielberg summer blockbuster about dinosaurs. So that was definitely my shit. It was.
I wanted to see it so bad, and my damn uncle scared me.
Well, I mean, that's kind of his job. I can speak as being the uncle trying to scare the shit out of his nephews.
But it's funny because this is coming from the kid that like watched The Shining when he was 5 and Jaws when he was 6.
Yeah.
So I don't know what I was so scared about.
Well,
But
it's an interesting thing. Like I don't. My memory's kind of crappy, but like you know how you talk to people sometimes, and they're like, "Yep, when I was 6 years old, my uncle's best friend Seymour and his wife Helen, and like all this stuff." Like they'll remember all the shit. Like that's not me, but I vividly remember being in that theater in '93. And I not only remember that, I remember the circumstances around it. I remember my grandparents hardly ever went to actually take me to see movies. Like as a group, they always would drop me off though. They drop me off and pick me up. This is back in the almost Stranger Things days where nobody had a cell phone and people who were supposed to look after young kids were totally fine with them going out in public, wandering alone for a whole day.
Yep.
But they would always take me to a movie theater or the mall theater or whatever. And this was the Century Cinemas, which are kind of the bigger cinemas. They always reminded me, if you remember that thing in Naked Gun, the joke when Frank Drebin's like, talking about after meeting Priscilla Presley, how everything he sees reminds him of her, and like there's that shot of those domes with the two tops, so they look like big giant boobs. That was the Century Cinemas. They were these giant dome theaters, so they had these big giant curved screens, and I remember not only being dropped off there, but I remember the night before seeing on the news, watching with my grandma, and she was we were just sitting there watching the news, and there was a big story about how Jurassic Park is selling all these tickets and showing news footage of these lines around blocks and how there's hour waits and everything's being sold out and all this. And this was before the time when you bought tickets in advance. Didn't, there was Fandango, there was no buying your ticket before, and I knew I really wanted to see it, and she took me to the first show on Saturday morning, and I went there expecting like, oh, there's going to be all this crazy line or whatever, and I we get there and there's a bunch of cars in the parking lot, but there's no people. Like there's no line. I walk right up to the ticket booth, and I remember she waited for me to make sure that they hadn't sold out, and they sold me a ticket, and I waved her on, and I walked in, and there was a little bit of a line at concession stand, and I remember very vividly buying a Coke and some Red Vines, and going into the theater and kind of getting a crappy seat a little bit too far to the left. Off to the left, but then they made it, and it was about 2/3 full, and so I'm like, oh, there's where all the people are, and then they made an announcement saying that they had sold out the screening, so could everybody, fill in all the empty seats, and so that meant, leaving the empty seats on the side, so everybody moved towards the middle, and I somehow ended up dead center of the movie, and when the movie started, there was it was like one of the first digital audio movies, and it had digital surround sound movies, and I remember the logo for that, which was this big like gold CD that was like hit the screen and then exploded into a million bits, and those bits surround sounded all around you, and it sounded like the loudest movie I'd ever seen. I was drawn in the first time. I jumped. The audience was screaming. They were laughing. It was like I remember the taste of the red vines and the Coke mixing together. Like I remember everything. That was a formative movie experience for me watching that at 12. And I loved it so much that was the summer of Jurassic Park for me. I bought the audio book, Michael Crichton's audio book, read by John Hurd, and listened to that over and over again. I bought John Williams' soundtrack on CD. I played the pinball machine. I saw the movie, I think, 7 or 8 times on its first run, and then I saw it a couple more times when it hit the dollar theaters. And I was so obsessed with it. I bought all the trading cards. I bought the making of books. Like I was obsessed with that movie.
It's such a good one. I finally got to see it in theaters when I was older. There's a local theater around here called the Coolidge Corner that is a nonprofit. They do like the sci-fi movie marathons and everything, and the midnight movies, and it's where actually I got to see the Indiana Jones remake, the Raiders remake, come around.
Oh.
Yeah, I can imagine you've seen that probably on several occasions. But that was
I was there when it screened for the first time anywhere. Because they brought it. Eli Roth got a hold of a copy of it, and he took it to Butt-Numb-A-Thon, which was Amy Coole's 24-hour film festival, and that's where Harry saw it, and Harry was a big fan of it and like wrote about it extensively. And my understanding is that because Spielberg was a big and a cool reader, it still blows my mind to this day, but he read the site a lot, and he heard about the Raiders remake there. And I know that right after like we all started talking about it, he invited those guys over to Amblin, and they got to meet him, and he watched it. And if people don't know what we're talking about, there's these kids that did a shot-for-shot remake of Raiders of the Lost Ark, but they started shooting it when they were like 12.
Yeah, and then they finished it when they were 18.
Yeah, they started. It took them years, and this is like the first like couple of years of them doing it. It wasn't available anywhere. It wasn't on VHS. It wasn't. They could only do it either from memory or from just going to the theater, and they replicated it shot for shot, line for line, and like the guy used his like dog as the Nazi monkey, that kind of thing, and they like tied a string around its paw so it did the Heil Hitler thing that they do in the movie. And like it's legitimately one of the most amazing things that you can see, because it's all about the love of this one film. And what's also incredible about it is because they shot it over such a long period of time. In one scene, the kid playing Indy will be 12 years old, and they'll do a cutaway to something, and then they'll cut back for the next line, and he's suddenly 17, and he's like got 5 o'clock shadow, and his voice is deep, but he's doing the next part of the thing.
And it's hilarious because the girl playing Marion ages the same amount too, so it's just completely bonkers from scene to scene. And like I asked them, because they were all there. They came for the showing, because what they were allowed to do is, I guess George Lucas would not allow them to make money off of it, but Spielberg allowed them to show it as long as they came around with a print of Raiders and charged people to see that. So as long as like Amblin got a cut, so they were able to come, and they brought the letter from Spielberg and like showed it to everybody. And and I asked them, I said, the movie is. It really is a shot-for-shot remake of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he goes, it's exactly 10 minutes and 11 seconds shorter. And I go, why? And they go, because the plane fell through at the last minute, and we couldn't do the plane fight.
Yep. And then but they got it, didn't they? They did like a crowdfunding thing, and they ended up shooting. So you have these, suddenly this 10-minute section of the movie where all these 12-year-old kids are now, in their 30s, recreating this plane fight.
And I loved they did every stunt. They did every car chase. They did the
submarine. Like that was the crazy shit. I remember when I watched it, like the first time, I'm like, they actually, there's a scene when Indiana Jones is climbing up the side of a submarine, and they went, it's where a submarine was docked, and they found it, and they actually threw it, like the kid jumped in the water and then swam over the sub for the shot and started climbing up the side of it.
It's so unbelievable. And so I got to see that, and then a couple of years later got to see Jurassic Park. And this was, a few years before it came out in 3D. So it's like an original, pristine print of it. And it just has to be seen in a theater. There's just something about Spielberg films, man.
Yeah, they play different. I mean, hell, they play different, and I grew up watching Jaws is my favorite movie. I grew up watching it in a kind of the most screwed up way that you could watch what would become your favorite movie, because what my mom used to do, and I'm sure a lot of moms, from my generation of kids did, is she would record movies off of HBO. So she would,
Yep.
we would watch something would play, and she would record them. So I had all these tapes that had 2 or 3 movies on them, depending how long the tape was.
You and me both.
And I remember the Jaws tape. It was Jaws and Superman the movie, and both are. And I have a story about Superman the movie too, which I'll get to in a second. But both of them were long, and I think that she recorded over a movie that was before Jaws, and so Superman the movie ran over the first 10 minutes of Jaws. So for most of the time that I saw the movie, from probably ages 3, 4, 5 to 7 or 8 or 9, where I was super obsessed with it. The movie didn't really start for me until well into the first act. So I think the scene where it started, it was around the time that the Kintner boy attack was happening.
Oh yes.
And then I remember watching it again. We re-recorded it on something else, and I had the full version, and then I remember seeing it in widescreen on a widescreen VHS or a Laserdisc transfer or something that I saw it on, and it blowing my mind that there was pieces of the movie that I'd never seen because they were all cut off or pan and scan, and then you see it big for the first time, and it's a whole different experience. It's I don't know. It's fascinating. That era of growing up as a movie geek is quite the opposite of what people today have. There's so you can have anything in its most pristine version, at your fingertips. Anything you want, you can find. Even the most obscure stuff, you can find ripped to YouTube or something.
Our copy of E.T., I mean, that was my father. It was all tapes on extended play, so there was usually 3 movies on every tape. And sometimes they were recorded off of, Channel 38's afternoon thing. So they were super long and also edited for time and content. So we had the TV edit of Caddyshack. So with hey, everyone, we're all going to take a shower.
I remember Repo Man had one of the best TV edits. I remember watching that as a teenager. It was very creative. It's kind of like what the Coens do now with their TV edit stuff. That's if you remember, that got a lot of publicity for the Big Lebowski. What they did is they actually had everybody record the TV stuff, and they wrote the dialogue, the new words, so it wasn't just fork this and whatever. And so the famous example is Walter from Big Lebowski. He has that whole this is what happens, what was he say? It's when a stranger fucks you in the ass or something. Was it his thing? Is this is what happened. You see what happens, Larry? You see what happens, Larry? But the re-recorded line was when you find a stranger in the Alps. When you find a stranger in the Alps.
They did that with Snakes on a Plane, and I always loved that. Samuel L. Jackson, I've had it with these monkey fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday plane. And that one just blew my mind when I saw that the first time. I'm like, you guys are having way too much fun.
Too much fun.
So you said you had a Superman story.
I do. And this is I'll kind of coach it I'll wrap it up in my name dropping story of the time that I got to meet Dick Donner. But what I told him is a buddy of mine named Jeff Boucher ran a film festival in LA called the Hero Complex Festival. And he would consistently bring in amazing, he had James Cameron came in and showed, I think it was Aliens or The Abyss. He showed one of his films. James Cameron was there to have a conversation afterwards. And Warren Beatty showed Dick Tracy. And, they would do all this these crazy. Ridley Scott showed Alien, I think he showed Alien and Blade Runner together, and like they did all these crazy things. And he would sometimes invite me back, backstage to meet the people. And so at that time, I remember Dick Donner was there showing the Donner cut of Superman in Superman 2. I guess Superman 2 is the Donner cut, and then the regular Superman. And I went up to him and I told him a story, and that story is what my mom told me, is that my mom and dad, their very first date was to see Superman in '78, and then they saw Superman the movie was their first date. They obviously fell for each other, and a few years later they got married and they had me, and then the rest is history. So I went up to Dick Donner and I said, hey, I just wanted to thank you, because if you screwed up that movie, I might not be here. That was my parents' first date, and if they didn't like the movie, maybe that I wouldn't have happened. And Dick Donner clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Son." So he now Richard Donner claims me as one of his children, and I'm going to take that and hold him to it.
So yeah, your version of Back to the Future is far stranger.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
You go back in time and inexplicably ruin Superman and then cease to exist.
To exist, for sure. I mean, I don't know. If there's still a chance that I get lucky with young Leah Thompson, maybe it's all worth it. So.
Oh man, that's wild. Yeah, going back to seeing movies, in a different way than you saw them recorded, I didn't realize how the opening scenes of Jaws, are, of a young woman skinny dipping, right? And, you're a young kid and you see that and, it's like, okay, cool. This is interesting. Maybe you can see something, but you get a little older and you go, oh, cool. They filmed that scene, so well that, that she's skinny dipping, but it's like a silhouette. But then I saw it on Blu-ray. No. There was nothing artistic about that at all. That was just full on. Yeah, there's a naked girl swimming here. And I was like, oh, damn. All right.
You can see everything on that struck me the first time I saw it 35, when I saw the movie on 35 and on non-faded print. So it must have been no, it was Greg Nicotero found one of the rare IB Tech prints of Jaws. That's where I noticed it. And so this is pre-Blu-ray and all that, but it's just like, yep, that's Chrissy's very naked and is very 70s, so she's got I can see her pubic hair, and I never would have imagined that kid, obsessing over Jaws and just seeing the, like you said, the silhouette and going, yep, that girl's obviously meant to be naked.
That's wild. Yeah, and our copy of E.T., that's a very dark, very intentionally lit and filmed movie, the quintessential Spielberg look everywhere, right? But because we had, a recorded off of HBO on bad extended play VHS, the first time I saw a clean cut of that, I'm like looking around and going, there's so much stuff in these shots.
Did your parents try to theme the movies, or did they just record whatever happened? They happened to have space for and what was on.
It depended. Like, when my dad started realizing that my brother and I, were into this stuff, he'd, okay, so Labyrinth and Dark Crystal would go on a tape with episodes of Fraggle Rock, and stuff like that, and he'd throw like The Last Starfighter and Flight of the Navigator on the same tape together, and stuff like that. But I think before it was just he'd record, whatever the new movie HBO had out that week was just the next one he'd put on there.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's I don't know. I think I learned my love of I think about it all the time. Like what would make a good double feature, and I think a lot of that stems from probably my parents remembering actually going to see double features, and programs, stuff that was programming that was kind of similar to each other, and them recording their tapes that way and me watching them that way. Like I remember one of my tapes was The Thing and the Fly were on one tape. I had a tape that was Legend, Labyrinth, and Neverending Story. Were all the three on there.
Yes.
And Geez, there's two or three more where it was just like that, then like Superman and Jaws, which, don't really have a connection other than being giant, tentpole 70s, classic movies. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to like set up double features for people, especially if it's movies that they've never seen, right? Like all of those. Finding someone that's never seen those movies, let alone see them back to back, it would just be awesome.
Yeah, no, I've put a lot of thought into that stuff. I think about that stuff a lot, and I would love to screw with an audience, and like I would love to show an audience something that they don't know, like what's coming, that they just know that they're there for a double feature of something, and really make them try to figure it out. Like I always thought it would be really cool to do a double feature of Demons, the Lamberto Bava Demons.
Yep.
I'm sure you know that film. And double feature that with Woody Allen's Purple Rose of Cairo, and
Holy shit!
People start picking out, because that's all about movies. They're all like set in a movie theater, format, and stuff that happens in the movie impacts what's happening in real life, and in the Purple Rose of Cairo in particular, it's Jeff Daniels steps off of the out of the screen and into the real world, and in Demons, a movie about demons causes real demons to happen, and an end of the world scenario to happen, and I'm like, oh, that would be really neat to kind of do a Whiplash double feature that it has the same themes. So
yeah, absolutely,
let me do that.
Have you seen Lake Mungo?
No, I haven't. I've heard really good things about it though.
So that when you watch it, if you remember me when you watch it, let me know how great of a double feature it would make with Searching.
Okay.
I watched it and I'm like, yeah, I'm like, this movie, it Lake Mungo's awesome, and I think it was like Scott Wampler or one of those guys tweeted about recommending it, and I'm like, oh, let me find this movie because it sounds interesting. And as soon as I got over with it, all that popped into my mind was Searching, and I hadn't thought about Searching, even though it was one of my favorite movies the year it came out. And they would just be thematically so perfect, even though one's a horror movie and one is just a movie, like Gone Baby Gone would make a double feature with one of those as well, but that's just so friggin' bleak.
Yeah.
Oof.
Oh, that's another good thing. Like, another good double feature idea is showing people something like The Mist, and I know that nobody is allowed to like this movie, and I don't like it, but I respect it. But something like The Mist and a Serbian film, just
damn,
where you like of just the darkest, bleakest, most fucked up endings, that you could possibly imagine.
We just caused an entire theater to cease to live.
Oh, like yeah,
they didn't kill themselves; they just gave up.
Well, and nobody would forget. I couldn't like let people see a Serbian film and not know what they were getting into. That's not one that you try to surprise somebody with.
Oh, that movie! Woo!
It's a rough one. I interviewed. Funnily enough, I interviewed Robert Patrick for this movie he did that showed at South by this year called Tone Deaf. And for whatever reason, the beginning of the interview is all about me having to explain the Serbian film because somebody made an offhand joke about having a bleak ending. And I'm like, well, at least it's not like a Serbian film. And then everybody there was like, what's a Serbian film? And I'm like, I can't, like, are you gonna make me say what goes on in that movie to you? And then as I was telling like Robert Patrick, he's like, they made a movie like that? I'd never do a movie like that. I'm just like, well, you're the T1000, you can have that choice, I guess.
I have that quote from T1000. That's too bleak for me.
Yep. No thanks, pass.
I'm all set. Yeah, that one. That's a rough one. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I mean, God, there are way too many things we could talk about, and I'm like a treasure trove. You've met lots of people that I've always wanted to meet.
I've been very lucky.
Yeah, you've been very, and like you said, when did you start? Was Ain't It Cool your first gig?
I mean, technically, I assume, yeah. I mean, it's the first stuff that I ever wrote was for my high school newspaper.
Nice.
And I went to James Bowie High School here in Austin, not David Bowie High School, James Bowie High School. And they had a newspaper. I assume that the student newspaper is still the same. It's called the Lone Star Dispatch. And I was in my journalism 101 class as a freshman, so I must have been 14. And it shared a space with the newspaper and yearbook room. And I remember going over to visit the newspaper people, and then I was a huge fan of George Carlin growing up, and George Carlin was coming through town to do a stand-up special. So I asked them if I went to this concert, the stand-up concert, could I write a review for it for the the school newspaper? And they said, yeah, sure, why not? It's like, why don't you go? And so I went, and being 14 years old and figuring like, oh, I'm a real reporter now. Like, I stayed afterwards and I tried to get an interview with George Carlin, and I met his manager, a guy named Jerry Hamza, came out, and I said, hey, look at me. I'm a young kid. I'm a freshman in high school. I want to interview George Carlin. He's like, nah, dude. He's like, nah, no, he's a little tired. He's gotten 2 shows, and he had to do 2 shows tonight, and he gave me his card though, and he's like, why don't you give me a call? I will, I'll talk to George and see if he wants to do like a phone interview with you. And I said, yeah, like that'd be great. I'm like, it's just a high school newspaper. There's no pressure. And he said, yeah, that's why I think George might do it. And I'm like,
oh, that's
really?
Awesome.
And a couple weeks later, I was on the phone with George Carlin, and I did a big interview with him for my, high school newspaper, which is really funny because I was 14. We hadn't even covered interviewing in Journalism 101 yet. So before I interviewed like my classmates or whatever, I interviewed one of the most influential comedians of the, of the 1900s and, of all time. And he was amazing and very patient and gave me a good interview. And I wrote about it, and I was doing that kind of thing, but it was always through my, I went and got into the newspaper program, when I, I think I couldn't get until the junior year. I think that was the youngest that they would allow people to run the newspaper. And I ended up running the entertainment section, and I would be doing interviews with, I interviewed David Prowse when he came for a local convention, the guy who played the body of Darth Vader. And
yep.
And I interviewed Mike Judge for the high school newspaper. I interviewed a few people, and Harry Knowles started Ain't It Cool in '96, I believe, and I think I met him in '96 or '97. I used to buy movie posters off of him. That's what he and his dad used to do. They would sell movie memorabilia, and I bought a One Floor Over the Cuckoo's Nest 2 sheet from him, and a Friday the 13th 1 sheet from him. And I remember that was the first time, and I'd always go over to their booth because I was a movie nerd, and they always had new movie stuff. But he didn't really notice me at all until Quentin Tarantino ran a film festival here called the QT Fest, where he would bring his 35 and 16 millimeter prints of like Grindhouse classics and do those double features and stuff. And Harry noticed me there and noticed that I was the only one there for every movie, including the all-night horror marathon and then the kiddie matinee, a few hours later. And so I was the only one that wasn't in his friend circle that was actually doing that, and going to all the movies. So then he found out that I was doing these interviews and stuff. He's like, I started this website, and I'm like, I barely know what a website is, but yeah, I'll write for you. And so I started writing, and I graduated in '99, and by that point I was a fixture on Ain't It Cool, and Ain't It Cool was hugely popular. There were, articles that were getting tens of millions of clicks, the stuff like he leaked the X-Men costumes the first time anybody saw the X-Men costume.
Yep.
That and stuff like that. And I remember having arguments at that point with the newspaper teacher, who was, just this, old Texas, woman, that just very Texas, this is how it goes. And she's like telling me that I couldn't write my articles the way I was writing them, because that's not how it's done. And I'm like, lady, I'm writing like I wrote an article that got 500,000 views, and you're telling me that this isn't the way it's done. I'm like, I'm living proof right now that this is how it's done. And so I was butting heads a lot with her, at that point, and I was probably, a little too smart ass for my own good, but I was just like, I'm like, everything you're telling me is wrong because I'm having success already doing this, this way, and this is the way that I like to do it. So, yeah, it was, I probably should have paid a little bit more attention to, writing in a non-bloggy style, but, the good news for me is that, all those jobs are about as dead and obsolete as getting a full-time online blogging job is now. So,
well, right, yeah, just
so
it all becomes something new, right? Like, my brother got me into doing this because he's a local film critic in the Boston area, works for The Escapist, and he's like, my fans want me to do a podcast, you should come on. And it ended up being like he recognized in the first few episodes we did, he's like, oh man, he goes, Chris, you got something going on here. Name this thing. This is your shtick. And I'm like, why is it that I'm enjoying doing this so much? Because this is not in my comfort zone at all, right? And what I went back and realized is my dad used to always say he wanted to be a DJ. He wanted to be a radio DJ, like a talk radio DJ, that would like talk about music and stuff in between them. Like, what is that it? Like, is it like that in the back of my head? It's like something that like my dad passed on to me, and it's like, that's pretty cool. And you talked about, just that George Carlin thing, this is much more small potatoes, but getting, someone like you on, which I'm still completely honored and really happy you said yes. It's weird. We have such a connection where you can just kind of go and say, hey, I do this thing. You want to do it? And like that thing with George Carlin, it's like, no pressure. It's just some guy, sitting in his house in Lynn that wants to talk to you. I've had so many people that I never thought in a million years would want to come on, just be like, yeah, of course. Like the people that run the last Blockbuster in the world. I do a Blockbuster show. And like, I'm like, oh my God, there's the last one in the world now. I got to get them on my show. They're on like 60 Minutes and, Fox News and, and she's like, dude, she goes, of course I'll be on your show. And I'm like, well, how much time can you give me? She goes, I'll talk to you for 3 hours if you want. She goes, this is going to be the fun conversation. She goes, those other things are annoying. And I'm like, oh, sweet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is so much more pressure doing anything that's either in front of an audience or doing something that's, is going to be broadcast, and you suddenly feel like you're out of your depth, and the podcast format is something that I was very slow to looking at, and I very much wish that like towards the end of my time at Ain't It Cool, we'd been kicking around doing a podcast, and I wish that we would have actually done that, because at the height of that site's reach and power and the chemistry of some of the people there at the time, it's like that would have been translated great, but we just kind of dragged our feet. And but now I love podcasting. It's very much something that I'm, I listen to all the time. I have too many podcasts that I listen to now that it's getting hard to
it's addictive.
But I don't know. You just I've always been way more comfortable having a conversation with somebody than trying to do something super rigid and structured, and that's what podcasting is all about. It's all about the conversation. It's like Mark Maron's successful, because that's what he does, is he knows how to have a conversation with somebody. That's some of the stuff me and my high school newspaper teacher were having arguments about, because my writing was always conversational. It wasn't, I'm never going to be as insightful as Pauline Kael, but when it comes to breaking down a movie, but what I can do is I can relate to, to people and share my experience and, my interpretation of a movie in that way. And that's something that I think would translate very well to podcasting. And you mentioned Scott Wampler, but he and I are working on something that we're very close to, that I think that sometime this month we're going to do our first test recording of it. And if it goes well, I think we're going to have something really fun,
that's
to
awesome.
enter in this space with. when I left Ain't It Cool, there were so many people were asking me, "Are you going to start your own site? Are you going to, who are you going to write for and work for?" And and I was just like, I have no idea. When I left under those circumstances, that there was no safety net, there was no cool, just go take this other job, that I have waiting for me. I knew that I had to leave, and I couldn't stay with the site, and I left and let pieces fall as it may. But I looked into starting my own site, and I'm just like, I don't know how you start a new pop culture site in this era. Like nobody, I don't think people read that stuff anymore. It's like I haven't seen, that said, people read very specific things, but I don't see there being a hub like Ain't It Cool was back in the day, where it was a hub for everybody who loved movies to come.
Right. It was like, it wasn't like you weren't reading Ain't It Cool at the end of the day. That was the news.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There wasn't anything else. This is it.
I mean,
so that
Slashfilm is still like up there. I think Slashfilm's like
right, exactly
for that now. But like they don't have the community that Ain't It Cool did. It's like Birth Movies Death has some of my favorite film writing that's out there now, and I like
that's my current favorite. I love those guys.
But I don't. I mean, then I can name you 20 other sites that tried and failed, and it's like I just didn't have it in me to try to make Ain't It Cool 2.0. And I definitely didn't have it in me to ask any of these other, because I would have loved to have started something with Drew McQueenie and Steve Procopi and Jeremy Smith, who are Moriarty, Capone, and Mr. Beeks respectively, and I think that they still are amazing writers and amazing film commentators, but it's like, we've been at this for long enough where we can't let's do a startup. I couldn't get Drew to say, hey, come and work for a couple of years for free again. It's like, and see if we can build something. And the only other option was to start something with somebody else's money. And like Birth Movies Death was able to get along well because they had the smart film writers, but they also had the Alamo Drafthouse willing to financially back it, until it found its audience. And it's, I don't know, like to me, the movie blogging thing is like, in terms of starting a new site, it's just not, I don't think that there's an appetite for it. That's a shrinking industry with social media. Nobody wants to read articles for news anymore. They just want to see the news shared on social media. It's like that. You could do all the research and have the investment and pay writers to do it, but to write a story about it. But everybody reads a headline on Twitter, and that's and that's how they get the news. They don't go to one spot anymore. At least in my experience, they don't.
You almost don't even have to do press anymore. You just get you let an embargo drop enough to let people have one-line reactions on Twitter, and then there's your ad campaign for your movie.
It's why Dwayne Johnson negotiates his social media presence into his contracts, because they get so much more marketing buzz from The Rock making a 2-paragraph Instagram post about being on the set of the Jungle Cruise or whatever than they do buying a $10 million Super Bowl spot for it.
It's insane.
That's just the way the stuff is. But podcasting on the other hand is a place that I think is growing and hasn't quite hit its saturation point yet, and where the movie blogging, the pop culture blogging, I think absolutely has. And there's so many people that are so good at what they do that are out there that are having trouble finding work, because the outlets are drying up in that realm. But podcasting is very attractive to me, and not because I think I have an incredible podcasting voice. Anybody listening to this who's still stuck around, can certainly attest to that. But there are some knowledge stuff that I have for some certain things, and I think getting together with somebody like Scott Wampler, who's a friend, and he's got a great personality, and I think getting us together to bullshit about what I think we're going to be bullshitting about, with some of the people I think we can get to join us for that is to me is a very exciting thing. I'm sorry I'm being a little vague and cagey about it, but
no. You're piquing my interest.
Yeah. I'm gonna pretend that that's the intention, and not because I'm shit scared. It's all gonna fall apart, not gonna happen. So
Well, remember your good friend Chris Chipman here when you need to advertise for it and you want to come back on his little show.
for sure.
Wink,
Sure.
wink. No, and I mean that though. I have a feeling you and I could talk for hours, and that's the fun part about this.
Oh, for sure.
But I'm gonna try to wrap. Where are you right now? You're in Austin.
I'm in Austin. Yeah.
So what's it like 11 for you?
It is 12:13 in the morning.
Okay. So yeah, it's 1:15 in the morning. But I wanted to ask you another question because again, I would love to have you back on if you ever had the time because this is a dream come true for me because I like the world where it's someone close to me in age that I look up to that I've been following. I didn't realize until right now that you were only a couple years older than me in '99 when I was reading all your stuff on Ain't It Cool. That was just wild. But
No, I remember there was before I'm going to interrupt you here, but
no, it's okay.
I remember there was something that I wrote in the early 2000s maybe where I talked about my age, and I think at that point it was definitely when I was like I'm 20 years old or I'm 19 years old, and I mentioned it offhandedly, and I remember all the talk back was like, what the hell, like Quint's only 19, 20, like why am I listening to anything he has to say? It's like, what the hell? I'm just like, well, you didn't know that for the last couple of years you've been reading me. It's like, and you certainly certainly believe it. It's weird, the internet, and I remember being like introduced as one of the grandfathers of internet like movie journalism, and I'm just like, and at that point I was like 33. I'm like, dude, I'm in my early 30s. It's weird. It's this whole internet thing is a weird time twister, thing. So I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. Oh, what I was going to say is this is a silly interview question, but it piqued my interest when you started talking about other stuff. Who do you think you've interviewed the most?
Bruce Campbell. Bruce Campbell. I interviewed him a lot because I remember I got him a couple of times just to talk about Evil Dead stuff back in the day, and then I was on the set of Bubba Hotep for almost 2 weeks and got to know him a little bit there and interviewed him multiple times for Bubba during the course of its run. So there was a period of time where it was definitely Bruce Campbell for whatever reason. Jon Favreau's up there. I've interviewed him or been on his sets for everything he's made, post-made. So
yeah, nice.
Where, made, post-made. But he shot a movie called Made. And
I own a movie called Made.
There you go. I'm trying to not say Made too much in the same sentence. But I met him when he was on the fest circuit for that, and that was another thing where it's happened to me a few times in my career where somebody who I respected was just like, oh, he's like, are you Quint? He's like, I know who you are. Like and I was like, well, me? And that was one of the first ones was Favreau. Like we had like shirts made back in the day that had like all the spies, any cool spies that had their spy names, and mine was
yep.
Quint. We had shirts for like the local Austin stuff, and like I had a shirt that had that caricature of the guy in the shark's mouth, and it said Quint on it, and Favreau saw that and was just like, "Is that you?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and he goes, "Oh man," it's like, "I read your stuff all the time," and
yeah.
ever since then, we've kept up. So I've interviewed Favreau so much, and I've interviewed Favreau so much, in fact, that I've interviewed him about shit he never made. So like we have a long, like hour-long interview that we did about what he was going to do with John Carter of Mars when he was on to direct that before he ended up jumping ship and doing Iron Man. So it's like
wow,
that's definitely up there for sure.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, so I'm getting word from my wife that my son just woke back up. So that's that's okay. So that's a perfect way to end. I would love if you ever have time to have you back on. I have a game that because it took me so long to start this episode tonight, I decided to hold it to if I ever have you on again. But I made a card game called Right Quote Wrong Movie, and I've been playing it with people. I've been taking it to like local like game cafes to play. I'm thinking about kickstarting it, so I use it as like an icebreaker on the show. But it's played like Cards Against Humanity, but you use movie quotes and match them with the wrong movie and try to make it funny.
Okay.
So
no,
if someone asks if you're a god, you say yes, the Passion of the Christ.
yes.
Yeah.
No,
So,
yeah.
but I'll hold you
yeah.
on that. But I'll let you please plug something. Tell people about what you're doing currently, where they can find your stuff. If they don't already know, I'm hoping they already know. But
Sure. Well, I mean, it's not easy to find me because I'm not in a centrally located place. Like my time at Ain't It Cool, or then after that for a year I was with Rooster Teeth, and they had a news section called The Know, and it's easier to point like, oh, I'm always there, but now I'm freelance. So most of the stuff that I'm writing right now is on Syfy Wire. I do a lot for Syfy Wire, but the best place to find me is just my Twitter. It's my name at Eric Vespe. And definitely, if you're interested in hearing about what I have coming up, I certainly plug all that stuff on my Twitter, and I'll for sure, if this thing with this podcast with Wampler takes off, then you'll be hearing about it a lot on my Twitter feed.
awesome, man. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Quint, Eric Vespe, for shooting the shit with Chippa, and I really, really, really appreciate this, man.
No, thanks for having me.